Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Zodiac Secrets in Tarot.com. In this episode of the Lady Magnate's Magic Podcast, we're diving deep into metaphysics. Grab your favorite cup of antioxidants, whether it's green tea, coffee, or red wine, and join us for this insightful exploration. Beyond the physical, a journey through metaphysics east and west. Metaphysics defined. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that asks the biggest of big questions. What is reality? What does it mean for something to exist? Is there anything beyond the physical world we see? At its core, metaphysics examines the fundamental nature of reality and being. It deals with concepts like existence, objects and their properties, space and time, cause and effect, and the relationship between mind and matter. These may sound abstract, but they touch on issues we all wonder about, from whether the universe has a deeper purpose to what consciousness really is. In this conversational journey, we'll explore how different cultures and eras have tackled these questions. We'll start with Western metaphysical traditions, ancient Greek, medieval Enlightenment, and modern thought. Delve into esoteric philosophies like Neoplatonism and Hermeticism, then travel east to see how Indian and East Asian traditions, Vedanta, Buddhism, Taoism, etc., approach reality beyond the material. Along the way, we'll highlight how these ideas influence modern spirituality, science, and even personal growth. Get ready for a tour of humanity's oldest quest, understanding what is, why it is, and what might lie beyond. Classical foundations. Plato and Aristotle. Raphael's famous fresco, The School of Athens, 1511, depicts ancient Greek philosophers, Plato, center-left, pointing upward, and Aristotle, center-right, gesturing outward, symbolizing two foundational metaphysical views. Plato emphasized eternal ideals above, while Aristotle grounded philosophy in the concrete world below. Western metaphysics begins in ancient Greece, where thinkers first set out to explain reality in rational terms. The classical period is defined largely by the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, two philosophers who laid the groundwork for virtually all later Western thought. Plato, c. 427 to 347 BCE, argued that the world we perceive with our senses is only a poor copy of a more real, permanent, and perfect reality. This is his famous theory of forms. According to Plato, things like beauty, justice, or a circle have an ideal form, an unchanging, eternal essence, and the physical things we encounter are imperfect reflections of these perfect forms. In other words, for Plato, the ultimate reality exists beyond the physical world, in a transcendent realm of abstract ideals. A chair is less real than the abstract form of chairness. A beautiful painting is beautiful only because it participates in the eternal form of beauty. This worldview is a kind of dualism between the changeable material world and an immutable spiritual realm of forms. Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, Plato's student, took a different but related approach. He agreed that qualities like beauty or redness have a reality to them, but he didn't think they exist in a separate heavenly realm of forms. Instead, Aristotle thought forms are always embedded in matter. A rose's redness or a cat's cattiness can't float around on their own. They exist only in particular things. Aristotle was more of an empiricist. He trusted what we observe. He systematically categorized reality, asking what kinds of things exist and what it means to be a thing in the first place. He introduced the idea of substance, an individual thing that exists in itself, and accidents, attributes that exist in something, like color or size. He also formulated the famous four causes, explanations for anything in terms of its material, form, cause of change, and purpose. Where Plato looked upwards to eternal truths, Aristotle looked around at the natural world and tried to explain how it's structured. Despite their differences, both Plato and Aristotle grappled with being and reality at the deepest level. Plato's emphasis on a reality beyond the physical laid the foundation for mystical and religious metaphysics, the idea of a higher world of spirit. While Aristotle's more down-to-earth approach influenced scientific thinking about categorizing and explaining the world. Together, they set the stage for the next 2,000+ years of metaphysical debates in the West. Medieval metaphysics and the Great Chain of Being. After antiquity, metaphysical thought in the West continued and evolved, especially during the medieval period. Medieval philosophers, many of them also theologians, wove classical Greek ideas into the framework of Judeo-Christian religious belief. Neoplatonism, a later development of Plato's ideas, became very influential in the early century CE and the Middle Ages. The Neoplatonists, like Plotinus in the 3rd century, taught that reality emanates from a single, supreme source often called the One. The One is an utterly transcendent principle, beyond all categories of being or non-being, from which all of creation flows. Think of it like an ultimate light source. From the One shines out the levels of reality, first pure mind or intelligence, then the world soul, and finally the material world. This was a monistic and mystical vision of reality. Everything is ultimately one, grounded in the One. During the medieval era in Europe, roughly 5th to 15th centuries, scholars like St. Augustine, Boethius, Thomas Aquinas, Avicenna, and others tried to reconcile these inherited Greek metaphysics with religious doctrine. A key issue was the status of universals, general qualities or forms, versus particulars, individual things. Following Plato, some medieval thinkers, called realists, argued that universals like redness or goodness have real existence, perhaps in the mind of God. Others, called nominalists, argued that only particular things exist and universals are just names we use. For instance, Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, profoundly influenced by Aristotle, held that being can be understood in multiple ways, God's being versus humans being, etc. And he framed metaphysics as the study of being qua being, being in itself. Aquinas also Christianized Aristotle's ideas of substance and essence, saying that God is pure being itself. Meanwhile, thinkers like William of Ockham, 1287 to 1347, pushed nominalism and famously invoked Occam's razor, the idea that we should not multiply entities unnecessarily, basically urging simplicity in metaphysical theories. In medieval metaphysics, a common image was the Great Chain of Being, a hierarchical structure of reality descending from God, pure being, down through angels, humans, animals, plants, and minerals. Everything had its place in this divinely ordained order of existence. While thoroughly religious, medieval scholars kept alive questions about what is ultimately real. Is it just God? Are forms real? Are only individual things real? How do soul and body relate? Etc. By the end of the Middle Ages, the stage was set for new approaches to emerge during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Enlightenment rationalism and modern metaphysics. The Enlightenment, 17th to 18th centuries, brought a new spirit of inquiry. Philosophers started to question old authorities and rely on reason and science to understand reality. This period saw bold metaphysical systems, as well as skeptics who challenged metaphysics altogether. A major Enlightenment figure was René Descartes, 1596 to 1650. Descartes famously doubted everything except the certainty of his own thinking. I think, therefore I am. From that point, he constructed a dualistic metaphysics with two fundamentally different kinds of substance: mind, thinking things, and matter, extended things. In his view, reality had this split between mental and physical. The mind, or soul, was immaterial and could exist independently of the body, which aligned with religious ideas of an immortal soul, but mind and body somehow interacted. Not everyone agreed with Descartes. Baruch Spinoza, 1632 to 1677, took the exact opposite stance. He was a monist. Spinoza argued there is ultimately only one substance in the universe, and it is both God and nature. Everything we experience, mind, matter, trees, people, stars, are all just modes or expressions of this one infinite substance. In other words, the distinction between mental and physical is more about perspective. Underneath, it's all one reality, often equated with God or the universe itself. This was a radically different metaphysical picture, one in which God didn't stand apart from creation, but was creation. Another fascinating Enlightenment thinker, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, 1646 to 1716, proposed that reality is composed of countless fundamental units he called monads. These monads are like tiny, indivisible spiritual energy points, each a window on the universe. Leibniz's universe was harmonious. Every monad reflects every other, in a pre-established harmony, without directly interacting. He even entertained the idea of possible worlds, imagining that out of all possible realities, God chose the best one, hence Leibniz's often misunderstood phrase about living in the best of all possible worlds. These ideas show how creative metaphysics became in this era. On the other side of the Channel in Britain, empiricist philosophers were more skeptical about grand metaphysical speculation. John Locke and David Hume, for example, argued that we should only trust knowledge that comes from experience. Hume, especially, was critical of metaphysical notions that went beyond empirical evidence. He questioned the idea of causation. We see one event follow another, but do we really perceive a necessary connection? And famously argued we have no rational justification to assume things like the soul, or even the persistence of objects, beyond what we directly experience. Hume's hardline empiricism suggested that many traditional metaphysical claims, like the soul is immortal or God exists necessarily or every effect has a cause, were not truly grounded in reason or observation. They were just habits of thought. He warned that going beyond observable facts leads to dubious metaphysics. Enter Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, who tried to rescue metaphysics by redefining its scope. Shocked out of his dogmatic slumber by Hume's critiques, Kant proposed that we never know things in themselves directly. We only know things as they appear to us, filtered by our minds built in categories, like space, time, causality. So, Kant shifted metaphysics to be about the conditions of possibility for experience. Instead of trying to know the ultimate nature of God or the soul directly, which he thought was impossible, Kant examined how our mind structures reality. In a sense, he put metaphysics inward. The world conforms to the mind's concepts rather than the mind grasping an independent world in full. This was a critical turning point. After Kant, some philosophers felt traditional metaphysics, as the study of things beyond sense experience, was futile, while others, the German idealists like Hegel, built grand new systems inspired by Kant's insights. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 1770 to 1831, is one of those ambitious system builders. Hegel proposed that reality is fundamentally rational and shaped by mind. He saw the entire history of the world as the progressive unfolding of a cosmic mind or Geist, often translated as spirit, coming to know itself. In Hegel's idealism, everything is ultimately thought or concept. The whole universe is a kind of logical process, an absolute where being and thought coincide. This is abstruse stuff, but in simple terms Hegel suggested that reality has an underlying rational structure, almost like a single grand idea working itself out through nature, history, and consciousness. Not everyone was on board with that optimism. Thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, took a darker view. Schopenhauer agreed that there's a single underlying reality, but he identified it not as rational spirit, but as will, a kind of blind, striving, irrational cosmic will or urge that underlies all things. He thought human life and indeed all nature is driven by this insatiable will, which results in suffering, an idea he partly drew from Buddhism. Schopenhauer's metaphysics was pessimistic, seeing the essence of the world as something not very nice, the restless will to live. By the late 19th and 20th centuries, metaphysics faced new challenges. Scientific advancement provided natural explanations for many things, and philosophers of a more analytical or scientific bent, like the logical positivists in the 1920s, even declared traditional metaphysical statements meaningless. They argued that if a statement can't be empirically verified, it's literally nonsense. This was an extreme view and didn't last, but it shows the pushback metaphysics encountered. Still, metaphysical inquiry survived, evolving with the times. Process philosophers, like Alfred North Whitehead, reconceived reality not as things but as processes. Existentialists, like Jean-Paul Sartre, took metaphysics in a humanistic direction, focusing on the nature of human existence, freedom, and being in the world. In academic philosophy, analytic metaphysics continued to tackle questions about time, identity, possibility, causality, etc., albeit in a very technical language. Meanwhile, postmodern thinkers questioned whether there is any single coherent reality at all, or just many perspectives and narratives, a critique of the very idea of an absolute metaphysics. Throughout all these twists and turns, the big metaphysical questions persisted. Whether through reason, experience, or mystical insight, Western thinkers kept searching for what is ultimately real. Is it material stuff? A divine mind? A system of concepts? An interplay of forces? Or is reality many-layered, with both physical and spiritual dimensions? To this day, Western philosophy doesn't have one answer, but the rich history of answers forms the backdrop for contemporary thought. Esoteric strands, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Theosophy. While mainstream Western philosophy was developing through Plato, Aristotle, medieval theologians, and Enlightenment scholars, esoteric traditions were exploring metaphysics in a more mystical, secretive way. These currents often ran parallel to orthodox philosophy and religion, sometimes intersecting with them. Let's look at a few key esoteric metaphysical systems: Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, Western occultism, and Theosophy. Neoplatonism we touched on earlier. It's essentially a mystical extension of Plato's ideas. In the 3rd century CE, Plotinus and his followers taught that all of reality emanates from the One, the ultimate source, which is beyond all description. From the One comes the divine mind, nous, containing the Platonic forms, and from mind comes the world soul, which in turn produces the material world. The farther things emanate from the One, the less perfect and real they become. The goal for Neoplatonists was a kind of spiritual return to the One. Through philosophy, ethics, and contemplative practice, the individual soul could ascend back up the chain of being to reunite with the ultimate source. This is a very spiritual metaphysics, seeing the universe as a series of emanations from a single divine ground. Neoplatonism influenced Christian, Jewish, and Islamic mystics. For example, Pseudo-Dionysius in Christianity or certain Sufi thinkers in Islam were inspired by Neoplatonic ideas. It provided a framework where diverse religious ideas could find common ground in the notion of a single, ineffable one behind all reality. Hermeticism is another esoteric tradition, rooted in writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary fusion of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. Hermetic philosophy emerged around the same era as early Christianity, 1st to 3rd century CE, and encompasses teachings on alchemy, astrology, magic, and the divine. One of the hallmark Hermetic principles is as above, so below. This cryptic phrase expresses the idea of a correspondence between the macrocosm, the universe as a whole, the above, and the microcosm, the individual person or the earthly plane. the below. In simpler terms, Hermeticism posits that the patterns and truths of the cosmos are mirrored in us and in the natural world. For example, the movements of the planets might correspond to spiritual forces, or the human being might be a miniature model of the cosmos. Hermetic metaphysics often presents the divine as both transcendent and immanent. God is the all, present in the cosmos itself. An influential Hermetic text, the Emerald Tablet, puts it this way: that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of the one thing. Hermeticism sees the world as alive with spiritual meaning. Everything is interconnected: mind, matter, stars, spirits, all part of one unified reality. This tradition fed into later Western occult movements and Renaissance magic. In the Renaissance, 15th to 16th centuries, there was a revival of interest in these esoteric ideas. Scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola blended Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and Christian thought into a rich esoteric synthesis. They believed in a Prisca Theologia, a primordial theology, that truth was revealed in antiquity and could be found threaded through all religious traditions if interpreted esoterically. Secret societies and magical orders, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, etc., also drew on these metaphysical ideas, treating them as hidden knowledge about the spiritual structure of reality. Western occultism covers a range of practices and philosophies, alchemy, ceremonial magic, tarot, etc., that often rest on a metaphysical view of a multi-layered reality. For instance, occultists speak of astral planes or subtle realms beyond the physical. A 19th century occultist might say that in addition to the material plane, there are higher vibrational planes of existence: etheric, astral, mental, causal, etc., each populated by appropriate entities, spirits, angels, etc., and governed by metaphysical laws. This kind of esoteric cosmology often borrows from Neoplatonic emanation, higher realms emanating downward, and Hermetic correspondence, higher and lower reflecting each other. The practice of magic in such systems is essentially applied metaphysics. If as above, so below holds, then by enacting certain rituals or mental focus, below, one can affect the spiritual forces above, which in turn produce changes in the material world. Metaphysical assumptions like the existence of hidden energies or vital forces pervade occult systems. For example, alchemy wasn't just primitive chemistry. Alchemists thought material transformations, like turning lead to gold, corresponded to spiritual transformations, purifying the soul. While modern science dismissed these ideas, they've remained alive in various subcultures and have even seen a resurgence in New Age spirituality. One modern esoteric movement worth noting is Theosophy. Founded in the late 19th century by Helena Blavatsky and others, Theosophy explicitly tried to blend Eastern and Western metaphysical ideas into a grand esoteric worldview. Theosophists taught that there is a single divine absolute, a unity behind all that exists, and that from this absolute the universe unfolds in stages. This is an emanationist cosmology, much like Neoplatonism. They believed in reincarnation and karma, drawn from Hinduism and Buddhism. The human soul evolves over many lifetimes, learning lessons until it achieves spiritual liberation. Theosophy also popularized the idea of 7 planes of existence: physical, astral, mental, etc., and claimed that enlightened masters or adepts, the masters of wisdom, guide humanity's spiritual evolution. It's a colorful mix, elements of Neoplatonism, Hindu Vedanta, Buddhism, and Western occultism all rolled together. Theosophy's aim was to find the common mystical core of all religions. It had a huge impact on subsequent New Age and metaphysical movements, introducing concepts like karma, chakra, meditation, and ascended masters to Western audiences long before they became mainstream. In all these esoteric traditions, the theme is reality is more than meets the eye. There are hidden layers, spiritual forces, cosmic principles at work behind the scenes. Whether it's the Neoplatonic one, the Hermetic correspondences, the occult astral planes, or the theosophical hierarchy of beings, we see a conviction that the material world is just the tip of the iceberg. Esoteric metaphysics invites the seeker to peer behind the veil, often through initiation into secret knowledge or mystical experience. It's metaphysics with a strong dose of mysticism and often a practical component, alchemy, magic, etc., to interact with those subtle realities. These currents ran alongside the more openly discussed philosophies. And interestingly, in today's world, some of these esoteric ideas are being revisited in light of modern science and spirituality, but more on that later. Now, let's turn our gaze to the East, where equally profound metaphysical systems arose, sometimes surprisingly parallel to Western ideas, and other times very different in approach. Eastern metaphysical traditions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and non-dualism. While Western philosophers were arguing about forms, substances, and the One, Eastern philosophies were developing their own answers to what is ultimately real. Eastern metaphysics is incredibly rich, spanning the philosophies of India, China, Tibet, Japan, and beyond. We can't cover everything, but we'll highlight a few major themes and schools: Vedanta and Samkhya from India's Hindu tradition, Buddhist metaphysics, Taoist philosophy from China, and the overarching idea of non-dualism that appears in different forms across the East. Vedanta: one reality, Brahman, behind the illusion. One of the central concepts in Indian philosophy is Brahman, not to be confused with the creator god Brahma. Brahman, with an N in the Upanishads, is the term for the ultimate, infinite reality. The ancient Upanishads, philosophical scriptures of Hinduism, around 800 to 500 BC, proclaim phrases like Brahman is the all and Atman is Brahman. Atman means the inner self or soul. These texts suggested that the core of your being, Atman, is identical with the essence of the universe, Brahman. This is a deeply monistic view. Everything, at the deepest level, is one. The Vedanta school of philosophy, which literally means end of the Vedas, implying it's based on the Upanishadic teachings that come at the end of Vedic literature, further developed this idea. The most well-known branch of Vedanta is Advaita Vedanta, associated with the philosopher Adi Shankara, 8th century CE. Advaita means non-dual, as in, not two. Advaita Vedanta teaches that only Brahman is truly real. Brahman is an infinite, changeless, eternal presence, often described as Sat Chidananda, being, consciousness, bliss. The everyday world of separate objects, people, and things? According to Advaita, that multiplicity is ultimately an illusion or appearance caused by Maya, cosmic illusion or ignorance. It's not that the physical world doesn't exist at all, but rather we misunderstand its true nature. We see many individual waves and think they're all separate, but really it's one ocean. Likewise, we see separate entities, but really everything is Brahman. The famous Advaita quote is Brahman is real, the world is mithya, an illusion, the individual self is nothing but Brahman. This doesn't mean Advaita ignores the world we experience. Instead, it says our perception of being an isolated individual, jiva, separate from the rest, is a trick of Maya. The goal is to realize one's true identity as Brahman, usually through knowledge, jnana, meditation, and ethical living. When that realization dawns, enlightenment or moksha, the individual self is understood to have never been separate. It was Brahman all along. This is a deeply metaphysical liberation. The boundaries of self and other, matter and spirit, all dissolve into one unified reality. Importantly, Brahman in Advaita is beyond all attributes. It's not a being or a god in the personal sense. It's being itself, pure consciousness. In practice, Advaita Vedanta encourages seeing the divine in everything and not getting fooled by surface differences. Samkhya, dualism of consciousness and matter. In contrast to Advaita's outright non-dualism, another ancient Indian school, Skaya, offers a dualistic metaphysics, but a very different dualism from Descartes. Samkhya, dating back perhaps as early as the 1st millennium BC and codified by Ishvara Krishna around 4th century CE, posits two fundamental categories of reality, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha means spirit or pure consciousness. Prakriti means nature or matter, in the broadest sense, including energy, mind, and all phenomena. Unlike Descartes, Samkhya's dualism isn't mind versus body, since mind, thoughts, and even ego are part of Prakriti, nature. Rather, Purusha is like the cosmic witness, contentless consciousness, and Prakriti is the content of experience, all qualities, thoughts, physical stuff, etc. According to Samkhya, originally Purusha and Prakriti are separate. Prakriti is one, eternal, and comprised of three gunas or fundamental qualities: sattva, clarity, light, harmony, rajas, energy, activity, passion, and tamas, inertia, darkness, heaviness. When Purusha, consciousness, comes into contact with Prakriti, nature, Prakriti starts to evolve, kind of like how the presence of a conscious observer activates the manifestation of the world. One might poetically think of it as Prakriti dancing when observed by Purusha. This evolution produces the various levels of reality: intellect, ego, mind, the five senses, the five elements, and so forth, a detailed cosmology of how from basic matter you get to complex mental functions. Crucially, in Samkhya the self, Purusha, is not the doer or enjoyer, it's just the witness. All actions and experiences happen in Prakriti, including what we normally think of as our mind and personality. Our true self is the detached consciousness that mistakenly identifies with Prakriti. The suffering of life, Samkhya says, comes from this misidentification. Purusha, pure consciousness, identifying with the body-mind complex of Prakriti and thus thinking I am this individual who is born and dies. The path to liberation, Kaivalya, in Samkhya is to deeply realize the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. When you fully discern that you are Purusha, the witnessing consciousness, and not the thoughts, not the body, not the emotions, those are all movements in Prakriti, you become free from entanglement. You, as Purusha, were never actually trapped. Only your ignorance made it seem so. Liberation is Purusha remaining eternally as the witness, with Prakriti no longer holding sway over it. Interestingly, Samkhya is atheistic, or at least non-theistic. It doesn't rely on a creator god. It's a very philosophical psychology and cosmology. Even though it's dualistic in one sense, note how it aligns somewhat with Advaita Vedanta. Both say that misidentification, confusing what's self and not self, is the problem, and knowledge of one's true nature is the solution. In fact, later Hindu thought often combines Samkhya and Vedanta ideas, as in certain interpretations of yoga philosophy. Buddhist metaphysics, emptiness and impermanence. Buddhism, which arose in India in the 5th century BCE with Gautama Buddha, took a strikingly different approach. The Buddha was famously wary of metaphysical speculation that didn't lead to the cessation of suffering. Early Buddhist texts often show the Buddha turning the conversation from cosmic questions back to practical ones. However, over the centuries, Buddhism developed rich metaphysical philosophies as well. One fundamental Buddhist teaching is anatta, no self, the doctrine that there is no permanent, unchanging soul, Atman, in persons. Instead, what we call a self is just a bundle of processes, the 5 skandhas: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness, that are impermanent. Likewise, Buddhism emphasizes anicca, impermanence. Everything conditioned arises and passes away. So from the get-go, Buddhist metaphysics tends to avoid eternal substances or essences. Around the 2nd century CE, Nagarjuna founded the Madhyamaka, middle way, school of Mahayana Buddhism. He introduced the concept of shunyata, emptiness, perhaps the most famous, and to many, confusing, Buddhist metaphysical idea. Emptiness in this context means that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence or own nature, svabhava. In Madhyamaka, nothing exists independently or permanently. Everything exists only in dependence on other things, dependent origination, and as soon as you try to pin down a thing, it melts away under analysis. This isn't nihilism. It's not saying nothing exists at all, but it's saying things don't exist in the way we think they do. We tend to perceive a world of distinct, solid entities with their own essence. Madhyamaka says this is an illusion. Ultimately, even the distinctions we make, this versus that, self versus other, samsara versus nirvana, are empty, hence the middle way that avoids extremes of existence or non-existence. In short, all phenomena are inherently empty of fixed being. Realizing this is key to enlightenment in Mahayana. It's a profound shift in perception, dissolving attachments and aversions since everything is seen as fluid and interdependent. Another school, the Yogacara, mind-only, or Siddhamatra, took a different tack. It posited that what we experience as the external world is actually a projection or transformation of mind/consciousness. Sometimes summarized as mind-only, this view doesn't mean nothing exists, but it suggests that what we call matter has no existence apart from consciousness. Reality is more like a dream or a mental construction. There is a storehouse consciousness, alaya vijnana, that contains karmic seeds which give rise to our perception of a world. Thus, Yogacara can sound almost idealist, like Berkeley in the West, who said everything is ideas in the mind, though Yogacara would also say mind itself is empty of self-nature, so it loops back to emptiness in a way. All Buddhist schools share certain metaphysical assumptions: rebirth, karma, different realms of existence, heavens, hells, etc., which can be seen as mental states as well. But Buddhism is unique in its combination of metaphysics with phenomenology, close examination of experience. In Zen or Chan Buddhism, for example, they might say ultimate reality is just thusness or Buddha nature, experienced directly when one stops conceptualizing. This is a kind of metaphysics that is heavily experiential, defying neat logical explanation. To sum up Buddhist metaphysics, there is no eternal substance, no soul, no creator God, etc. Everything is process, a flow of momentary events, and any attempt to find a solid core to reality reveals emptiness. Yet, there is an ineffable suchness to existence that enlightened ones awaken to, often described in paradoxical terms. It's empty yet miraculous. Buddhism invites us to question the reality of the self and all things, not to depress us, but to free us from clinging and open us to compassion, since the boundaries between self and other are seen as illusory. It's a very different flavor from, say, Aristotle or Aquinas. Taoism, the way beyond words. Moving to ancient China, we find Taoism, Taoism, offering a metaphysical vision centered on the concept of the Tao, Tao. The Tao is often translated as the way. In the classic text Tao Te Ching, attributed to Laozi, and the writings of Zhuangzi, the Tao is portrayed as the mysterious, ineffable process that underlies the universe. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The Tao Te Ching begins, warning that we can't fully conceptualize the ultimate reality. Taoism encourages an intuitive, harmonious approach to life in accord with the Tao. Metaphysically, we might say the Tao is like the principle of nature's flow. It's not a personal God, but it's not just nothing either. It's the source of all things and the way all things unfold. One modern interpretation phrase is, Tao is the process of reality itself, the way things come together, while still transforming. That is, the Tao is the dynamic unity behind the ever-changing world. All specific things, The 10,000 things, as Chinese say, arise from the Tao and return to the Tao. Because it's beyond any fixed form, Taoists often describe it via paradox and poetry. They also emphasize naturalness and balance, epitomized by the famous yin-yang symbol. Yin and yang represent complementary opposite forces. Yin is receptive, dark, cool. Yang is active, bright, warm, etc. Importantly, they are not absolute dualisms. They are interdependent and cyclic. The yin-yang symbol shows each side containing a seed of the other, the little opposite colored dots, and flowing into each other. This symbolizes a metaphysical view that reality is a balanced interplay of opposites rather than a clash of absolutes. Taoism sees the world as a kind of polarity that ultimately resolves into unity. The Tao Te Ching says, "From the Tao came the One, from the One came two, yin and yang, from two came three, from three came the 10,000 things." So, Tao-unity-duality-multiplicity. But through all, the Tao remains as the guiding way. Some later interpretations, especially in Neo-Taoism, around 3rd to 4th century CE, when Chinese scholars combined Taoist and Confucian ideas with a dash of Buddhism, explicitly said that Tao is empty or non-being, Wu, as the root of being. One text notes that the Tao points ultimately to that which is other than being, Wu, not being, a conceptually necessary basis of being. This is reminiscent of Buddhist emptiness or even Neoplatonic one beyond being. The idea is that the ultimate principle, Tao, is not anything. It's an unfathomable no-thing from which things arise. Thus, it's pointless to try to conceptualize or argue about it. Better to align with it by simplifying life, cultivating humility, compassion, and going with the natural flow of events, wu-wei, non-forced action. In practical life, Taoist metaphysics fosters a kind of holism. Humans are not separate from nature. Our individual consciousness is part of the greater Tao. By observing nature, how water flows effortlessly, how trees grow, we learn how the Tao operates. The best life, Taoists say, is one that follows the Tao, spontaneity, simplicity, and flexibility. In a way, this is metaphysics serving as a guide to living. Understanding the nature of reality as a harmonious flow can help us live more gently and wisely. Non-dualism. All is one, beyond opposites. One thread that runs through many Eastern systems, and some Western ones too, as we saw, is non-dualism. The idea that the apparent separations in reality are ultimately transcended, and that there is only one or not two, Advaita. We already saw this in Advaita Vedanta's Brahman, Mahayana Buddhism's emptiness, which makes everything not two because subject and object, self and other are empty of division, and the Tao being the unity behind yin and yang. Non-dual philosophies emphasize experiential realization. It's one thing to intellectually say all is one, but the real aim is to perceive and feel the world that way, to see through the illusion of me versus you, here versus there, now versus then. In Hindu Tantra and Kashmir Shaivism, for example, everything is seen as the divine consciousness, Shiva, in playful self-expression, Shakti. In some forms of Buddhism, like Zen or Dzogchen, the practice is to recognize the innate non-dual awareness, a state of pure knowing in which the distinction between observer and observed drops away. Non-dualism often sounds poetic or paradoxical because it's pointing to something our language, which is dualistic by nature, full of subject/object, noun/verb distinctions, struggles to capture. Often teachers resort to metaphors, the wave and the ocean, the space in the pot versus the space outside. Advaita uses that one. The space inside a jar seems separate, but when the jar breaks, it's obvious it was always the one space, the movie on the screen. We get caught up in the moving images of life, forgetting the stable screen of awareness underlying them. The key takeaway is that beyond the seeming diversity of the universe lies a unity. Call it Brahman, Dharmakaya, Tao, the absolute, or simply the true nature of mind. And that unity is not an abstract concept. It's something one can realize or awaken to. Such realization is often described as liberation, enlightenment, or nirvana. It typically brings a profound sense of peace, compassion, and fearlessness, because fear and desire depend on feeling like a separate fragment in a world of others. Non-dual metaphysics thus closely ties to spirituality and ethics. If I truly experience others as myself, compassion is natural. If I see the world as my own manifestation, I can accept things more easily and act more spontaneously. It's fascinating that so many different cultures hit upon non-dual ideas. From the Upanishadic sages declaring one without a second, to Greek Neoplatonists exalting the one, to Sufi mystics dissolving into the beloved, to modern New Agers talking about universal oneness, it seems to be a perennial insight. Of course, not everyone agrees with it, dualistic perspectives abound, and some philosophers find the idea of an all-embracing one to be empty or unhelpful, but it remains a powerful strain in metaphysical thought. Metaphysics today, science, consciousness, and personal growth. After this grand tour of metaphysical ideas across history, where do we stand now? Is metaphysics just an academic exercise, or does it influence us today? In truth, metaphysical thinking is alive and well, not only in philosophy classrooms, but in science labs, spiritual retreats, self-help seminars, and holistic healing centers. We might not always call it metaphysics, but whenever we question what's really real or tap into something beyond the ordinary, we're in metaphysical territory. Modern spirituality and personal growth. Many people today explore practices like meditation, yoga, energy healing, or mindfulness. These often rest on metaphysical notions drawn from Eastern and Western traditions. For example, the popularity of yoga has familiarized people with the idea of chakras, energy centers in the body, and prana/chi, vital energy, concepts from Hindu and Chinese metaphysics. A Reiki healer or acupuncturist working with chi is essentially applying a metaphysical model of the body as an energy field. Such holistic healing modalities assume there are layers to a person beyond the physical, like an etheric body or aura, and that well-being depends on balancing those subtle forces. Traditional Chinese medicine explicitly works with qi, treating it as the life force flowing through meridians. This is a direct legacy of metaphysical ideas about energy. Likewise, Ayurvedic medicine in India works with prana and the three dashas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, subtle energies and elements that need to be in harmony. In the realm of personal growth and self-help, you'll encounter ideas like you create your reality with your thoughts or the law of attraction, popularized by The Secret and New Thought philosophy. These are essentially metaphysical claims, rooted in a kind of mental idealism. They suggest mind is primary and the material world responds to our mental intentions. The notion that consciousness or belief can shape the world, sometimes called manifesting, is reminiscent of both Eastern idealism, Yogacaرا's mind-only, and Western esotericism. Ceremonial magic's principle that imagination and will can affect outer reality. People practicing visualization or affirmation techniques are, perhaps unwittingly, engaging in a form of metaphysical practice, assuming a non-ordinary link between thought and outcome. While the scientific jury is out on whether you can literally think yourself rich or healthy, the popularity of these ideas shows a widespread intuition that there is more to reality than brute matter, and that mind has a crucial role in what happens. Consciousness studies. One of the hottest areas where science meets metaphysics is the study of consciousness. The nature of consciousness, how subjective experience arises from the brain, or whether it is a fundamental feature of the universe, remains a deep mystery. Some scientists and philosophers are exploring theories that sound quite metaphysical. For instance, panpsychism has gained renewed attention. This is the idea that consciousness is a fundamental and ubiquitous aspect of reality, perhaps every particle has a proto-conscious aspect. This harks back to ancient views, some pre-Socratics in Greece, or Jain philosophy in India, or even certain animistic indigenous beliefs that mind or spirit is in all things. When a mainstream publication like Scientific American asks, "Is consciousness part of the fabric of the universe?" you know metaphysics is back in the conversation. Other researchers propose that consciousness could be an intrinsic property of the universe, akin to space, time, or mass. This challenges the dominant materialist view that only physical matter/energy are fundamental and mind is a byproduct. Even discussions about artificial intelligence veer into metaphysics. Can consciousness be substrate independent? Is it a pattern, or does it require a special kind of stuff, like neurons or maybe quantum processes? If an AI claimed to be conscious, we'd suddenly confront the metaphysics of mind and personhood head-on. Physics and cosmology. Modern physics, while highly empirical, often raises metaphysical questions. Theories about the multiverse, multiple universes existing with different constants or timelines, stretch our concept of reality. Are these other universes real if we can't observe them? That's a metaphysical debate as much as a scientific one. The weirdness of quantum mechanics, particles being in superposition or affecting each other instantaneously at a distance, entanglement, has prompted almost philosophical interpretations. Some suggest consciousness might collapse the wave function. Others propose every quantum event spawns new branches of reality, many worlds interpretation. The nature of time is another metaphysical puzzle under scientific scrutiny. Is time fundamental or an emergent property? Does the future already exist in a block universe, or is it open? These questions echo those of ancient metaphysicians, but now with equations attached. Even something as seemingly straightforward as what is matter becomes metaphysical when physics tells us atoms are 99.999% empty space and particles are also waves of probability. It almost invites comparisons to Buddhist emptiness or Plato's cave. We don't perceive reality as it truly is. Unity of science and spirit. There are also modern thinkers trying to bridge science and spirituality explicitly. Fields like noetic sciences or researchers in parapsychology delve into phenomena like near-death experiences, telepathy, or the power of intention. While controversial, these explorations ask us to keep an open mind about unexplained aspects of reality. Sometimes the language of quantum physics is co-opted, rightly or wrongly, to give a scientific gloss to metaphysical ideas. You hear phrases like quantum consciousness or the quantum universe is interconnected, so we are all one. Often the science is stretched in these analogies, but it shows the desire to reconcile the empirical and the mystical. Holistic worldviews are emerging that borrow from systems theory, ecology, and Eastern thought, portraying the universe as an interconnected web, much like Indra's net from Mahayana Buddhism, or the Gaia hypothesis seeing Earth as one living organism. Ultimately, whether one leans scientific, spiritual, or somewhere in between, the legacy of metaphysics is the understanding that reality has depth. We continue to ask, is there an underlying purpose or intelligence in the cosmos? Are we more than our bodies? What is the fate of the universe? Modern cosmology answers that in terms of heat death or big crunches, but humans also seek meaning, a role traditionally filled by metaphysics and religion. Personal meaning. On a personal level, engaging with metaphysical ideas can be a source of great meaning and transformation. Contemplating the nature of reality often leads to reflecting on one's own nature. For instance, exploring the concept of no-self in Buddhism might actually reduce one's anxiety and ego attachments, leading to a more peaceful life. Embracing a metaphysical belief in oneness might make someone more compassionate and feel less alone. Conversely, questioning old metaphysical certainties, like a rigid religious dogma, can be liberating but also challenging, sometimes resulting in an existential crisis, which is why existentialist metaphysics, Camus, Sartre, etc., dealt so much with the theme of finding meaning in an apparently indifferent universe. In today's pluralistic world, people often create personal metaphysical patchworks, a bit of science, a bit of Eastern wisdom, some personal intuitive experiences, maybe the religion of their upbringing reshaped by new understanding. This is sometimes called spiritual but not religious, or New Age, or just philosophy of life. At its heart, that's metaphysics, an attempt to articulate what is real and important in the broadest sense. Even those who say they have no metaphysics likely have implicit ones. A hard-nosed skeptic might say, I only believe in the physical world, what science tells us. That itself is a philosophical stance, often called materialism or physicalism. It has its own metaphysical commitments, that matter/energy is all there is. That view too can influence how one lives, perhaps focusing on tangible achievements and pleasures, or perhaps finding awe in the complexity of matter itself. Others might adopt idealism, mind is primary, dualism, mind and matter both fundamental, panentheism, the universe is in God but God is also beyond it, etc. These aren't just abstract labels, they subtly guide our priorities and values. In a way, metaphysics is the story we tell about reality, and that story shapes how we experience life. Are we biological accidents on a rock in space, or souls in a cosmic school of growth, or expressions of an unfolding universe becoming aware of itself? Each metaphysical narrative can inspire or depress, depending on how we take it. As we wrap up, it's clear that metaphysics, far from being an idle pastime, is woven through the fabric of culture, knowledge, and personal quest. From Plato's academy to a yoga studio, from a medieval monastery to a modern physics lab, the drive to understand the nature of reality persists. We may use different methods, logical argument, meditation, experiment, prayer, but the questions often converge. The nature of reality, consciousness, being, time, the soul, the universe, these remain as enchanting and perplexing as ever. Metaphysics doesn't provide final answers, and it's okay with that. The journey is part of the point. Instead, it opens our minds and imaginations. It encourages humility. Reality is vast and mysterious, and wonder, we are participants in this grand mystery. Whether one favors the elegant logic of Aristotle, the profound unity of Advaita, the emptiness of Buddhism, or the emergent phenomena of complexity science, all these perspectives enrich our appreciation of existence. In the end, perhaps the best approach to metaphysics is a playful seriousness, to explore deeply, but also recognize, as Lao Tzu might, that those who know don't speak fully, and those who speak don't know fully. We use words and concepts, but reality dances beyond them. Yet, we keep exploring because, as human beings, we are naturally metaphysical animals. We don't just live, we wonder what life is. And that wonder, sustained over millennia, has been one of humanity's greatest adventures. We truly hope you found this episode helpful and enjoyed listening. Share this with your friends and family so they can begin their transformation too. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, give this video a thumbs up and we'll be in contact. If you're really interested in esotericism, then check out our courses and ebook. Thank you for watching. We wish you ocean of abundance, great health, huge wealth, and true love.